Today on The State of Us, it's been 50 years since America's last real update to the Constitution. 7 proposed changes. Welcome to The State of Us. I'm your host, Justin T. Weller, joined, of course, today by our friendly redneck liberal, Mr. Lance L. Jackson. And what we're looking at is a piece from the New York Times where they asked 7 writers and legal scholars what they would change about the Constitution. So we've got 7 items to run through today. Some of them are going to sound like, yeah, that's something that most people could agree on. Some are going to sound like, there's going to be some people that are frustrated. But before we get started, Lance, what is the word of the day?
The word of the day is a 2-syllable word, pundit, P-U-N-D-I-T. And it is a noun, pundit, a person who has or professes to have great learning, actual or self-professed authority. So we're going to look at 8 pundits today. 7 have constitutional amendment adoptions they would like to see take place, and 1 has a whole series of comments about the Constitution. An author that we've had on the show, Mr. Jesse Wegman, and his piece about what the Constitution is about and historically what it's been. So we're going to take a look at what these pundits want to do today to the American Constitution.
So actually, Lance, one of these pundits has been on The State of Us before, haven't they? Jesse Wegman.
Yep.
He is a member of the editorial board at the New York Times, where he has written about the Supreme Court and national legal affairs since 2013. Safe to say that he is indeed a pundit, and he wrote the book, which is the book that was on The State of Us, called Let the People Pick the President, the Case for Abolishing the Electoral College. If you haven't listened to that episode, great episode. Tune in, check it out, because it really is, I think, one where you're gonna be surprised at what Lance and I thought. You're gonna be surprised at some of the arguments. I think that a lot of people have ideas about that one and don't know some of the backstory. So basically the 26th Amendment, for those that don't know, to the Constitution took effect basically about 50 years ago. And it extended the right to vote to all Americans age 18 and older. It was the 4th Amendment in the span of a decade, 3 of which expanded voting rights, and a burst of democratic reform nearly unequaled in the nation's history. It was also the last meaningful change to the Constitution. And based on the country's increasingly polarized politics, it's likely to remain the last for anyone alive today. The 27th Amendment, which was ratified in 1992, if we've got history buffs out there, they're like, whoa, wait a minute, the 27th Amendment was a historical quirk that basically they're arguing doesn't really count for these purposes, because it was more of a, since the Constitution doesn't get this spelled out perfectly right, let's spell it out. So that's why they're saying 50 years since any real meaningful changes, because for most people, again, our resident historian here is welcome to correct me, I don't think the 27th Amendment has much effect on people's day-to-day lives.
Not much.
In the country. So the first one up, Lance, the right to unionize. Now, if you're about to tune out because it's like, oh my God, I heard it was the New York Times and we're going to have 50 things in here that are wild-eyed liberal crap, you just wait, because we're going to get to some other stuff that's definitely not. They really did do a nice job of picking some stuff across the aisle. Basically, the proposed amendment would say that all workers shall have the right to engage in concerted action for purpose of mutual aid or protection, to form and join labor unions, to engage in collective bargaining, including at the worksite, firm, and sector levels, to picket, strike, and boycott, including against secondary employers, and to exercise those rights free from coercion, discrimination, or retaliation. Laws or contracts that restrict or impair the rights protected in this article shall be null and void. Congress shall have the power to enforce, by appropriate legislation, the provisions of this article. That's suggested by Kate Andreas, a professor at Columbia Law School. What do you think, Lance? This is, I'm going to guess, get a thumbs up from Friendly Redneck Liberal?
Well, like I told you, I have been in the last couple of years negotiating my own contracts outside of the union. I spent 37 years within the union, teachers union, and I'm a strong believer in union rights. But I also see once I get to a certain point, there is some validity to negotiating outside the union for myself individually. But I still think, so I see both sides of this, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But for me personally, I think that if you look at the historical significance here, we're talking about the lack of earning power for workers. This downfall started in the 60s and 70s as labor union and labor power began to wane in the United States. The last great time for labor unions in the United States was the Great Depression and the war, and immediately after the war until the mid-50s. And isn't that what the people who say make America great again say they want to go back to? Is that time period? That was when labor union numbers were the highest. So I think one of the things that we forget when we talk about the bad rap that labor unions get sometimes when, they say things like, well, I can't move that ladder because that's the electrician's ladder and I'm a plumber. And so that's not my union. I don't do that. I understand that goes on. I fault unions for that kind of mentality. But if you look at powers to the workers and more equal pay and equality within the workplace, the further we get away from labor unions in this country, the more power we give to the wealthy. And so I think that this is something that people need to take a look at, and they need to dispel their rumors, their myths, their attitudes about the negative ideas of labor unions and look and see the value of the worker to the company when labor unions were at their height in the United States. And I think if people do that, they might have a better idea, a better feeling about this, and maybe not quite so much negativity, because I think there is a, I know you don't like this, Justin, but there is a correlation to union power and power for the workers and the value of the workers in the workplace.
It's a tricky one because we talked about recently this idea, this court case actually about, workers, could you force your company to make space available for your union? And I guess my point here is I have more of a technical issue than a principled issue with this particular amendment. Do I think that people should have the right to form a union if they want to? Sure. What right should the business have to retaliate against that? I don't know. I mean, we haven't spelled that out here. Can you be fired for unionizing? Right now, you can in many cases, and in some cases, no. So I guess what I'm getting at is I'm not sure there's enough clarity on the amendment. I mean, at the moment, basically it's just saying you can unionize, and there's nothing that nobody can do about that. And one of the items, which again, I don't think that's the one where procedurally it might be more of an issue for me, to engage in collective bargaining, including at the worksite, firm, and sector levels. I need some legal analysis understanding if what we're saying there is that we're requiring the business to make space available for us to unionize. Again, some consideration on the size of the business too. I'm not sure that it's fair to make a 50-person firm provide space. Is it fair to make a firm with 10,000 workers provide space? I don't know. But to Lance's point, I think it is something that has to be discussed because there's too much inequity in people who have the ability to and people who do not. The next one we're going to look at, I'm just trying to get the ultra polarizing ones out of the way first, because the next one, I'm sure people are going to have some thoughts on. Proposed amendment to the Constitution would read, Section 1, the word person as used in the 5th and 14th Articles of Amendment to the Constitution of the United States applies to all human beings, including unborn human beings, from the moment of conception, at every stage of biological development, irrespective of age, health, function, gender, race, or dependency. Section 2 says nothing in this Constitution shall be constructed as conferring or protecting a right to abortion. And Section 3, this article shall not be constructed to prevent emergency procedures in case in which a reasonable medical certainty exists that constitution of a pregnancy will cause the death of the mother. So this one, obviously, taking abortion head on, since lots of people will argue that the Constitution does or does not say anything about abortion currently. One thing that we do know is that the word is never used in the Constitution at the moment.
So for those of us who aren't pundits, what's this one saying?
This is basically saying that we're going to regard at the moment of conception that life as a human life, as opposed to just a fetus, which therefore doesn't have the same rights as a fully born human being. This is the whole thing with this show today, folks, is we don't have a lot of time to go into each of these. We're throwing them out there and letting you think about them. One of the things I have said when we have talked about abortion before, that I have the largest hesitancy on, is clearing up whose rights, right? Whose rights do we violate to satisfy somebody else's? And that's not saying that I think that this is the way to go with this amendment, because I don't see here where we're spelling out very much about what that means or the interpretation, and I could see some issues with that, not the least of which is that we're endowing, life forms that have zero capacity to speak for themselves to, have rights, which I'm saying carries a whole host of things with it that we haven't thought about, because it sounds nice for people that are, against abortion, but it also is going to carry a whole host of things of, okay, well, if you're the one that's carrying around the human being, now what type of new restrictions do we have about what you can and can't do? Because you can't just infer your will on this other human. I guess my point is it gets real sticky, I think, because now we're saying it's definitely a human, where right now we basically say, well, we really don't know, but here's what we're going to do. And I have argued for a long time, as Lance can attest to, that what we have failed to do is define when we become a person. And I think this article is interesting because it attempts to do that, but I think it skirts, again, it takes the easy approach, which is to say, well, at the point of conception, are we really human then? If we look at the moment of conception, I don't think most of us are going to stare at that and be like, oh yeah, that's a human being, But you could also argue that we're not human until 2.5 or 3 or 10 or 18 years old. So that to me is the biggest issue with this, is it again avoids answering the question of when do we become a person? And then we can take it from there. But we have to answer that question to know what type of rights a fetus does or does not have.
You need to go back in the archives, people, because I used to get blamed all the time for never answering the question. And we've had 2 here today already, okay. And Justin hasn't really said anything about either one of them. I'm going to take another strong
yes to
stand
number
here.
1 and no
Justin's
to number 2.
Really mouthing around both of these first 2 because they're a little controversial. And I'm just standing up and telling you. And I will tell you why that I'm against this. And that's because, again, historically, my mother-in-law was a longtime nurse and a professor of nursing. And she made it very clear to me when this discussion on abortion would come up. She would say, you can believe whatever you want to believe. You can make whatever law you want to believe that you want, but know that no matter what the law is, women are going to seek abortions out. And so you might as well have it to where everybody is taken care of and you don't have deformities and women being killed and babies being killed because they're having to have backroom abortions being done because it's illegal. She said, I was a nurse and a nursing professor before Roe v. Wade, and I have been one since Roe v. Wade. And let me tell you, it's a lot better now than it was, because I saw many, many women and fetuses as my work in a nurse in the emergency room who had been scarred by people who were performing illegal abortions. Send your emails to podcast@thestateofus.org and let us know how you feel. But I am right up there. Yes on unions, no on a strict outlawing of abortion. And all you have to do is read some dystopian literature if you want to as well. And you start turning females into baby factories. Don't know how many of you have ever read or are watching the series of Handmaid's Tales, or you've read The Giver or watched the movie The Giver, where women were just turned into baby factories. And that's the slippery slope I think that you're going down with an amendment like this as well. Besides the fact, like my mother-in-law said, you won't stop it no matter what law you have. So there you have it.
Let us know your thoughts. Coming up, the right to digital privacy, a Supreme Court for our time, the right to free movement, a prohibition on involuntary labor, and a commitment to peace. What do those mean, and how would they change the nature of American society? To find out, keep it here on The State of Us. We'll be right back.
So do I have a chance to be a pundit and run for political office with these comments now being on air so that...
Well, sure. Everybody has a chance.
Okay. Would anybody vote for me since I'm coming out straightforward on these issues?
They might. They might. I mean, I think there's an...
You think people who would disagree with me vote for me because I'm being honest?
I think there would be some people who would.
Okay. That's my hope, is if I would run, that there would be people who didn't necessarily agree with my stance on an issue, but would vote for me because I would be honest with them and telling them how I feel and why I feel that way. And I would hope that we would vote for someone who would be honest. We would want someone to represent us who would be honest, but maybe that's the pipe dream. So I don't know. But anyway, so what's next? What's next when I give my sitting there in the Coliseum, giving my thumbs up or thumbs down on?
Well, I think that, I mean, just on that note, I do think the Virginia governor's race was an interesting example of that because, you know, you had somebody that basically refused to directly say, I love Donald Trump. He said, I like some of the policies. I'm not really going to talk about Trump himself. And I mean, you know, this is the first time they've elected a Republican in 12 years to governor. And when some of the voters were asked, they said, you know, well, we feel like he's his own person, you know? And so, no, I don't agree with everything, but I like that he seems to be paving his own way.
We ask politicians to tell us what we want to hear, and then we get mad at them when they go in and do something differently. I would just love to have a group of politicians who tell us this is the way I feel, and if I get this vote, this is what I'm going to do. And but I'm being honest with you, and you know where I stand, because we elect so many people saying they're going to do all of this, that, and the other, and they do none of it. And then once they get in, they have an 80% chance of getting reelected, and they just stay in forever.
We could greatly benefit from leaders who give us straight answers when they have a decision inside of them. We could also do with leaders who genuinely are okay saying, I'm not sure about that.
No, if you're a leader, you can't be unsure. I disagree with you there. If you're going to be a leader, you need to be sure. You can't. That's the idea of leadership. I don't know. I just disagree with you on that one.
You don't think a leader it's okay for them to ever be unsure about anything?
They can be unsure, but then they have to make a decision one way or the other.
That'd be an interesting take that down the road of if the president can really ever be a leader, because 80% of their job is a whole bunch of crap happening all over the place that that they can't be out in front of because it just happens, and then they have to decide what to do about it. Is the president a leader? So, a prohibition on involuntary labor. This one is basically a referendum on the 13th Amendment, a revision to the 13th Amendment. The proposed amendment reads, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. It's basically making the change to the way the 13th Amendment currently reads, is that involuntary servitude is basically a acceptable form of punishment. That's the only time that it's allowed. In other words, as punishment for a crime, theoretically speaking, we can enslave you, right? Now, obviously in common practice, not really, but there is a fair point here, which is to say that one of the reasons the for-profit prison industry exists the way that it does and that prisoners get put to work the way that they do is partly because this is a little ambiguous. The way it's written right now is, well, they are working for whatever, 10 cents an hour or something. So it's not really involuntary servitude, but at the same time, it's not like they're necessarily given a real choice either. I'm fine with this. I don't think we should have slavery. I think the prison system needs to be reformed anyway. Criminal justice system's kind of a lot of it right now, the prison system in particular, is a disgrace. We're locking people up and spending billions and billions of dollars on this. And as Lance and I have discussed many times, there's a lot of waste occurring, and we could be doing a better job of rehabbing people and getting them out into society again, rather than just focused on lock them away and spend, again, a fortune keeping them locked up.
I agree with the pundit on this one. I think that we need to do away with this kind of working them for 10 cents an hour. I think that's wrong. And again, then we get into the whole thing of, well, then, we're giving them 3 hots and a cot, and okay, make them pay for it. And I'm all for that, because, hey, you know what you're doing then? You're rehabbing them because you're teaching them money management. You're going to go to work. You have a bank account. This is what it's going to cost you to live here. This is what it's going to cost to feed you. So therefore, you're making this money. You turn around and pay for your living environment. Makes sense to me, because that's what they're going to have to do. That's the skill they're going to have once they've paid their fine to society for whatever crime they have been accused of and found guilty of. So I'm fine with the follow-up that says, well, then let's make them pay for the prison and let's make them pay for the food. Great. That's okay. I mean, I think that should be something that we're doing anyway. So thumbs up on this one. Agree with the pundit. Not good to pay somebody 10 cents an hour to make something that the prison system is then turning around and selling for profit and making money off of the penalties of others.
Well, we have one here that by the court of the state of us, we can pass. We got it done. One amendment in the bag. A commitment to peace is next. The proposed amendment, in order to promote world peace and consenting to such limitations on sovereign powers as required, the American people declare that international law is part of our law, directly creating rights and duties for citizens. Acts tending to and undertaken with intent to disturb the peaceful relations among nations shall be unconstitutional and shall be made a criminal offense. The inviolable and inalienable rights of persons are the basis of peace and justice within and beyond U.S. territory. That last line there, you got my approval. The inviolable and inalienable rights of persons are the basis of peace and justice within and beyond the U.S. territory. This is not probably, if listeners have been listening a long time, I think the United Nations is underutilized. I think, yes, it has lots of problems. I think one of the big problems with it is that many countries, some of the world's most powerful countries, are not bound to the decisions of the United Nations, or they're bound to the decisions, but then they can do whatever they want inside their own country, which, again, greatly weakens the capacity of any international body of government to do anything that keeps people accountable. I think this one's fascinating because it would force the U.S. out in front as an example to the world and say, we really do take this seriously and it's not just a show for us. I also understand people's concerns about, couldn't we get bound to something that we really hate? Yes, that is possible. As in any democracy, that is possible. So it is possible in the United States. It happens all the time. Every election, people get pissed because we elect somebody that you don't like. I don't know. That's how democracy works, is that sometimes it doesn't go your way. But we don't like that idea.
Well, since this is a democracy and I have a vote, I'm going to disagree with this pundit, and it's thumbs down. I do not want to be tied to the rest of the world to tell us how we want to do things. And I will just back it up with this. And this is probably unpopular with some people, but why do so many people want to come to the United States from other countries to live here? So we must not be as bad as what is being painted here. Do I think we have issues? Yes. Do I think we can do a better job? Most definitely. Would I love to see us do a better job on this? I would hope so. But at the same time, I do not like being tied to other people to tell us how we're going to do things. So with my democratic vote, I vote thumbs down against this pundit's idea of international law superseding American law.
A question here. If we revised it to require that Congress take a vote, within 30 days of the passage of any international law as to whether or not it will be adopted in the United States. Would that satisfy our interest in getting our leaders to lead and having to make a decision while also making a serious commitment to
I didn't know we could make amendments to these.
international
I might
policies?
have wanted to make amendments to the first three. I thought we were just taking them at face value.
No, I'm just asking. It just occurred, as you were speaking about that idea just came to me, and I'm like, well, that would be interesting because it would preserve our right to sovereignty.
Sure. Yeah,
but
I think
it would force our government to take international law seriously and put out a decision rather than what we do right now, which is a lot of times we abdicate and just say, we're just not going to talk about that.
I'll be a leader here. I won't hem and haw. I'll say, yeah, if we were going to give our leadership the power to vote within 30 days. I mean, I would just like to see our leadership vote on something within 30 days. I would do it. I would do it for that sole purpose alone.
Okay.
It's like, now we know how to get you guys you people to do something. Is that if we threaten to enact laws from other countries, all of a sudden you don't filibuster and you don't waste time and you don't hem and haw around. You'll just actually get in there and vote on something. I like it. Yeah. If that worked, I would say we do that for everything. Hey, our friends in Malaysia just passed a law. You guys got to vote on this. Hey, the folks in Tunisia just passed a law. You need to vote on this. I would love to see Congress get off their butt and start voting every day instead of saying, we can't vote on this because we have to do this and this and this and this. And, we're going to invoke this clause. And by the time they wait, it's like, guess what? This new law just went into effect because you dilly-dallied around.
A few simple... See, look at that. Things can work, right? We started out with a thumbs down and a thumbs up, and we came to 2 thumbs up on a compromise. So, wow. And that all took like 10 minutes.
Yeah, right?
So it can.
Not only are we pundits, we are leaders.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Well, coming up, the right to digital privacy, a Supreme Court for our time, and the right to free movement. How would those change our Constitution? To find out, keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back. The right to digital privacy. We've been talking about this, it feels like a lot this year on The State of Us. Who are monopolies? What type of rights do we have when it comes to our digital presence? Well, here it is, the proposed amendment. The right of the people to have privacy and to be secure against searches and seizures of their persons, houses, papers, and effects, including their data and the metadata created by their actions, shall exist regardless of where located and shall not be violated except through processes that are necessary and proportionate, including by a warrant issued by a judge upon probable cause and supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the person or place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized.
Thumbs up.
Thumbs up. Done.
There we go.
On to the next one. That was the easiest one.
No, I mean, it's illegal searches and seizures, right?
Right.
I mean, I've believed in this since I read it when I was in junior high school.
You can't just barge in here and look at whatever the heck you want whenever you want.
Goes all the way back to we don't have to house the soldiers because that's what the British government tried to do to us before we fought for our independence. It's like, I got some privacy here and you go through the proper channels, then I lose my right to privacy, but you got to prove that I'm doing, that you have some solid proof that I might be doing something illegal. Then you have the right to look. Otherwise, no, you don't. I'm all for that. Daggone it. Keep my right to privacy.
The right to free movement. No state or political subdivision of a state shall pass any laws, regulations, or binding judicial decisions that on their own or in their cumulative effect substantially limit the capacity of residents of other states, localities, or territories individually, in aggregate, or as members of groups or professions or trades to enter, reside within, or work within their borders unless those laws are found to further a substantial government interest other than population control by means that are tailored to achieve that interest. The argument here is that America needs to be mobile. Part of what made us the nation that we are and manifest destiny was Americans are on the move. And as time has gone on, the pundit contends, that has been limited substantially by governments doing things that restrict movement. And you might say, well, what do you mean?
Well, let's say you want to move to an area because there's a job, but the houses in that area or the rentals in that area are 4 times greater than where you currently live. So are we really mobile? I mean, that's their point. That's their argument, is that there are parts of this country that are so expensive to live in that when they start to look for certain kinds of workers, those workers can't live there because of the expenses, and people can't move there from the places where they're living because they're living in some place economically that they can afford. And so the job opens up somewhere else, and they can't afford to move to that area because it's too expensive to live in that area per what they're going to be paid, or they don't have the money for the moving expenses to get to that area. And that's the point, is that we have, there were articles I was reading last year during the pandemic at home that showed there are people who are full-time workers in California who are living in their cars, who move their cars on a daily basis from spot to spot so that they don't get tickets because they can't afford an apartment close to work because the property values are so high. So they're not homeless. I mean, they're homeless, but they're fully employed. They're fully gainfully employed and can't afford housing in an area. To me, that's, I think, what we're talking about here. It's kind of a misnomer when it says, you're free to move. Yeah, you're free to move, but you may not be able to afford to move to a certain place because it's so expensive to live there. And like we're starting to see, that's where some of the jobs are. The jobs are in places where people can't afford to move because they can't afford to pay the rent in those areas. So it's more of an economic issue, I think, here than it is anybody going to argue that we really are being restricted. Nobody's telling you can't move, right? I mean, Justin, if you or I want to move right now, we can go anywhere we want in the United States. No, there's no law that says I can't pack my car up and cross the state border and go live somewhere else. But there may be laws in that locality that have been passed that the taxes are so high or the property values are so high that I can't afford to live there. And then therefore is their argument in this amendment is it's restricting my movement.
Yeah, the thing that I don't like about this one is because what it's designed to do is protect against malicious intent legislation, right, in local municipalities that are designed to keep certain people out of a locality. Okay, that's what this is intended to do, which from a principle standpoint sounds great. On the other hand, it also means that if, I don't know, Jackson, Missouri wants to say that, we're going to require that each home, have a lot size of 10,000 square feet because we want there to be more green space and houses to be less dense here because that's important to our people and that's what we want to do. They could do that, but there's a chance that a lawsuit based on the Constitution could overturn that. And if it truly wasn't passed with any malicious intent and the purpose of it from the people was, this is what we want our town to be like, and that's where I'm saying it's real murky because, who's to say what their intent was and who's to say, were they racist or was it just, or were they doing it just because that's how they want their town to be? The concern here is that is this big brother reaching down from above and saying, well, this whole right to local self-governance, you sort of have it, but not if we don't like the way that you want to do it. And so this is one where I'm going to say I like the principle of it. I'm not okay with the way that it's written. I think that we could get to something here that I could say yes to. I don't think I can say yes to it the way that it is because I'm too concerned that it's going to be too easy to trample on state and local government when they're really in the true cases where they're not doing anything malicious, where they're really just trying to, do something that is to govern how their city is going to be constructed and built. At the same time, there clearly has to be more given to this because we have these problems. Everything that Lance said is true. There's lots of places where this inequity is rising and rents are skyrocketing and on and on and on. So I think there's a way to get to yes. I can't say yes the way that it is because I think there's too many opportunities in such a simple amendment to, steamroll small government. So Supreme Court of our time, the last one, Lance, and this one we've talked about actually before. The proposed amendment says the Supreme Court will consist of 16 justices with a seat added to the court every 2 years until the number is reached. Seats on the court shall be allocated in a geographically uniform manner across the United States. That manner will be decided by Congress. No justice appointed after the adoption of this amendment shall serve more than 15 years. Upon such adoption, sitting justices will serve for no more than 35 years from the date of their appointment to the court. And finally, no law shall be declared unconstitutional by the court except by a vote of at least 2/3 of justices participating in a case.
Thumbs down. This is only a problem right now. So it's not been a problem historically throughout the existence of the United States. So this is an overreach. We don't need to change something just because we don't like what it's doing right now. That doesn't mean you change the entire system when the system has basically worked for the majority of the time it's been in place. So I would be against this. It's an overreach.
Thumbs down as well, because most of what Lance said, I'm on the same page of. I think this is a reactionary right now. I will say I do think the Supreme Court could use some changes. We've thrown around ideas before. This really only addresses the number. The geography thing's kind of interesting to me, but I don't love that. We're just going to let Congress decide how geographically it be, because it's like, oh yeah, that always works really well when we leave it up to Congress how this should be written up. That was my fear there. I like the idea of maybe something being tied to geography. I don't like saying, well, yeah, just leave it up to Congress. They'll figure it out. What they'll do is they'll compromise, all right, and they'll rig it, in whatever way suits them that they can,
based on what political party's in charge. And that's not good.
No, that's
bad. It doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or Republican. That's not good. We actually need to get away from that and start doing what's best for the country, for the people of the country, not what's best for the Democrats, not what's best for the Republicans.
So we had 7. We got to a solid yes on 2, and through a quick compromise, a yes on a third one. So, I think that's the nature of compromise, right?
Well, when you look at our show, then
we did something rather than nothing.
You can't say that we're liberal or conservative because we went all over the place on these 7 amendments.
Yeah, they were quite the assortment. So why did we have this conversation today, Lance?
Well, we did that because we here at True Chat have a mission, and that's who we work for. And the mission here is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. And that's what we did. And like we said, if you like what we said, let us know. If you don't like what we said, tell us why. Maybe we'll share your thoughts on the air. Podcast at thestateofus.org. Tell your friends and family when you're talking about this on your next road trip. And they say, well, where do you get this stuff? It's The State of Us on True Chat. And they say, well, where can we find this? And it's a podcast. And it's on Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, and everywhere podcasts are found.
The State of Us is available Tuesdays and Thursdays as a podcast first thing in the morning, and on the weekends in select talk radio markets. That's AM and FM radio stations around the country. For The State of Us on True Chat in Urbana, Ohio, Lance takes the cake again today on Pundit, although I think this was a much easier one. This was an easy one to weave into the conversation. So hopefully all of you out there learned how to use Pundit today. A victory for Mr. Lance L. Jackson. I'm Justin T. Weller.
I'm Lance Jackson.
Special thanks to our producer, Bradley Butch. Thank you all, our audience, for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.